Now, looking at the geopolitical change, and there's no surprise that today we dare to use the word complication or intricacy and take a good look at what's happening in the US, for example. Not only we continue to see the political polarization, but also people are very concerned about the international relation, especially under the Trump administration. And we know for so long the countries in Asia continue to play a critical roles, especially when we look at this global economy and also this political coalition. But meanwhile, some experts believe that current Trump administration need to readjust the strategies towards Asia. The countries such as China, Japan, South Korea are rather crucial, especially when we talk about the threat of North Korea today and also in 2026. Putting everything together, how do we understand that? What can we expect some of the major changes or even perhaps some of the issues that Trump administration need to address despite his recent trip to Asia? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who's the Dr. Michael Green. Dr. Green is a professor and chief executive officer at the United States Study Center. Previously, Dr. Green was a senior vice president for Asia at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and he's on leave from Georgetown University, where he was the director of Asia Studies and chair in modern and contemporary Japanese politics and foreign policy at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service. Well, Dr. Green, and welcome to The Missing Piece.
Thank you, Will.
Well, again, Dr. Green, such an honor to have you on the show. As I mentioned before, initially when I discovered you, because of this amazing article that you wrote, which is entitled Asia's Trump Problem, the region lacks leaders who connect with the U.S. president. Now, let's get to the article right away. In the article, significantly you mentioned the former Prime Minister of Japan is Shinzo Abe. Of course, that tragically speaking, that Abe was assassinated owed to political reasons. But right now, in the article that you mentioned, it is rather difficult to find, air quote, a replacement for Abe when it comes to Asia. So here's the question I want to ask. Why is it necessary to find someone who can represent or similar personality, character, political interests like Abe when we look at the second term of Trump presidency? Your thoughts?
Well, the main reason is because whether the U.S. is reassuring or anxiety-producing or annoying, Asian allies and partners, especially Japan, Australia, the Philippines, but India, Indonesia, need the U.S. to be present to maintain a balance of power and prevent China from having a free hand to coerce them, and to give them options. All of these countries, whether they're close allies like Japan or more non-aligned like Indonesia, want options. They don't want to be dependent on one country. They don't want to be coerced. So the U.S. is indispensable. And I often cite an episode in the early 1980s. Ronald Reagan was president. He had big ideas. He said he was going to win the Cold War. No one had said that before. It seemed a bit scary, this cowboy movie actor saying, I'm going to win the Cold War. And there was a lot of consternation among European allies. And they had a meeting, and the British foreign secretary, listening to the French and German and Dutch foreign ministers complain and worry about the new Reagan administration, he said, now it's true. Everything you say about the Americans is accurate. It's true, but they're the only Americans we have. And so let's get down to making this alliance work. So I knew Abe. I worked closely with him. I was in the White House, and in the Bush administration, he was basically my counterpart for much of the time. And I know he was very worried about Donald Trump. You know, the things that Trump had said about Japan historically, about trade, about alliances, about the military presence in Asia made Abe nervous. So what did he do? He studied, he thought, he convinced Trump to adopt Abe's free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, to be cooperating with other countries in Asia, to be engaged, and it worked. And so in that article, I said, so who's doing that this time in Trump 2.0? The Europeans, despite big differences in the transatlantic relationship, went in, supported President Zelensky of Ukraine, Keir Starmer of the UK, Macron and others went in and got Trump in a better place on Ukraine because it was so critical for European security. And they knew they couldn't do it without the US. So who's doing that in Asia? Well, I wrote the article before Trump's trip, which we can talk about. And there's no single leader now who's emerging with the influence of Abe. It is harder in Trump 2.0
That's
for
right.
reasons we can talk about. But I think all the meetings went pretty well. So you maybe have a lot of little Abes or a lot of leaders in Asia who figured out how to work with President Trump for their own interests. But since they're U.S. allies, it's really in American interests. So I can talk about the trip if you like, but I think it was reassuring for this region. They were, anxious about it, but it went pretty well from their perspective.
Well, Dr. Green, I'm surely interested in listening to your elaboration on the trip that President Trump wrapped up a few weeks ago. But again, I want to go back to the article that's tying what you just said. And in the article, this is what you wrote, and I quote, "But in Trump's second term, Asian leaders have struggled to manage their alliances with Trump, and no one has stepped forward to fill the hole left by Abe." Again, end quote. Something that you just touched on. But let's go back to Trump's trip recently. He met with the newly elected Prime Minister of Japan. Again, that's the first time. She was very excited. On social media, we saw that she was standing shoulder to shoulder next to President Trump. And President Trump didn't waste any time, gave her a lot of credit. And then, again, this is the big player, which is China. Again, that was the first time that the two leaders met despite the tariff war and the trade war and also this political rhetoric. So again, Dr. Green, I do want you to emphasize and also to elaborate, how much do you think that Trump actually scored during his trip to Asia? Because again, the newly elected Japanese Prime Minister, I guess we could say that she was a protege under Shinzo Abe. But again, it's hard and difficult to read Trump, especially when we talk about political international strategies. And again, with China, that's almost the same story. I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I touched on this in that foreign affairs article you cited. It is harder in Trump 2.0 for U.S. allies in Asia. One reason is President Trump himself is much more confident and believes he should be the decider. He doesn't want a staffing structure that presidents normally have. He wants to be able to give decrees and own decisions and not be scripted. And so in the first Trump term, you had a lot of officials and a lot of cabinet members who could write the script for U.S. foreign policy. They had to use the music of Trump and MAGA, but they could talk about competing with China. They could talk about the importance of allies, and they could work closely with people like Abe of Japan. This time, it's very clear Donald Trump wants to be, his critics say, the king, but he wants to be the decider, and he also wants to have the right to change his mind whenever he feels like it. And that is very confounding for allies. And his staff at the National Security Council in the White House where I work is much smaller, much less empowered. And so that's tough for these allies. And also the center of gravity in this White House and in this administration is much more focused on the MAGA agenda on immigration and culture wars and the unitary executive sort of weakening what they call the deep state. So it's much harder to have a consistent, developed interagency position on Asia and China. There was basically no strategy explained about Asia from the administration for months. Secretary of State Pete Hegseth went to Shangri-La and gave a speech that looked pretty much like previous secretaries about allies and partners and American commitment and the China challenge. Marco Rubio did a Quad meeting and other meetings early in the year, but nobody really knew where Donald Trump, the president of the U.S., was. And the NSC couldn't really tell them because there was no process. It was all the president making his decisions. So that was very challenging. And also, for Takaichi in Japan, it's much easier. She's on the right. She's comfortable with MAGA, a bit like Meloni in Italy. She doesn't mind. Her political base is not anti-Trump. Much harder for Lee Jae-myung in Korea, where the progressive camp is more suspicious of the U.S., or for Albanese in Australia, where the left of the Labour Party has some elements that are anti-alliance. But in opinion polls, while Japanese and Australians don't like Donald Trump and trust in the U.S. is the lowest it's been in decades, when Australians, Japanese, Koreans are asked about the alliance with the U.S., there is no change. 90% of Japanese and Koreans, 80% of Australians say we want and need the alliance. So even though they're on the left and it's less comfortable for them, Albanese and Lee Jae-myung, did what they had to do to lock in Trump. And Takaichi, although she has a minority government, she's not in a strong position politically, she's confident. She knows what she wants to do, and she did very, very well. What Abe did was that, but for the whole region. He had a strategy for the region. And Lee Jae-myung and Albanese stayed more focused on bilateral issues. I think Takaichi a bit more sort of focused on the China challenge with Trump. So I think that's why I say in each in their own way, these leaders each checked the box and sort of like the Europeans on Ukraine, not perfect, but got the U.S. president in the right place, and the U.S. system, the government, public opinion, the Congress can do the rest. The wild card also is China. Is Trump hawkish on China, like he was the first term, or does he want a grand bargain with China? There was worry that with Xi Jinping, Trump would, get a deal on fentanyl precursors, drug from China. The fentanyl is killing thousands of American youth, and China's producing most of the precursors. A deal on that, on exporting soybeans, stepping back from a trade war. But what would he give to get it? And there was a lot of worry he would give Taiwan, something on Taiwan, or maybe stop U.S. export controls on semiconductors. In his meeting with Xi Jinping, he didn't do that. So that was reassuring too. Japan wants a pretty strong U.S. line on China, and Korea and Australia a little bit less so, but they don't want the U.S. caving to China. And so that came out pretty well. But President's going to meet with Xi Jinping again in March, and President Trump loves big, giant ceremonial bargains with Putin and Kim Jong-un, and so there's still a bit of anxiety about that. But for now, it was I would say it was a message of continuity in American engagement with allies and partners and China at a time when uncertainty is just everywhere. And we'll take what we can get. We'll see where we are in a few months, but that's not a bad place for the U.S. alliances to be.
Well, Dr. Green, I'm very glad you mentioned Kim Jong-un. Let's get to the issue regarding North Korea. Again, rumor had it during the trip that President Trump visited those countries, and especially when he met up with the Chinese leader and also the Japanese prime minister, the topic of North Korea indeed came up. Because we know that North Korea has been one of the major concerns, not only for Japan, but also for South Korea, and also many other countries. And again, given the fact some more experts believe that today President Trump is dealing with a different personality of Kim Jong-un. It was no longer the person that he met before. It was no longer the rhetoric that he used to listen to. Again, we know that knowing that President Trump's personality, his political interest, ideally speaking, right now, the Trump administration would love to put their hands on North Korea and would love to bring this conversation back on the table. So, Dr. Green, from your perspective, again, since the person like Shinzo Abe is missing in the picture today, what do you think, or how do you think that the Trump administration, or especially President Trump himself, is delegating the task to deal with North Korea, propose ideas, or even listen to advisors when it comes to the nuclear weapon development in North Korea? Because this is alarming and this is threatening to the international community. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the Biden administration and the Obama administration did not try very much diplomacy with North Korea, because they sensed that a deal was going to be extremely difficult. I mean, the North Korean leadership changed their constitution in 2012, I think, to make nuclear weapons part of the law of the land in North Korea, and there's no premise for denuclearization. The only thing North Korea has been interested in, I would argue, all along for the last 30 years, the only thing they've been interested in is an arms control where they keep nuclear weapons, and we just agree on the parameters. That was when I was doing North Korea policy in the Bush administration. We suspected that, but they would still use language of denuclearization a little bit to keep us off guard. I don't think they meant it, but now they're explicit. Nuclear weapons are not going away, and so that made the Obama and Biden administration very leery of any kind of negotiation where they would look weak because Republicans in Congress would beat them up. Trump, because he's a conservative Republican, a bit like Nixon with China, had an opportunity to push diplomacy with North Korea without being attacked from the right. And he did. He pushed very, very hard in his first term and couldn't get a deal. He made people very, very nervous. I mean, as a businessman and as a president, Trump is not known for loyalty to his allies or his business partners. And his version of the art of the deal includes selling out his business partners or his allies to get a better deal. And so he put stuff on the table with Kim Jong-un about U.S. forces in Korea, about peace treaties, about exercises, military exercises with Japan and Korea. He put stuff on the table that no previous president would have put on the table because it's important for deterrence and because we need allies, and it would really undercut our allies. Donald Trump demonstrated he's very willing to put the equities of our allies on the table to get a deal with a Putin or a Kim Jong-un or maybe a Xi Jinping. That's a big challenge for our allies. But I also think in Hanoi, when he had his last meeting, in-depth meeting with Kim Jong-un, Trump will do all that, but at the end of the day, he won't take a deal that that's humiliating for him. And he walked away because Kim Jong-un put on the table a deal that was clearly not denuclearization. And Trump listened to people around him who said, this is actually not a good deal, and you're going to be criticized, and even Republicans in Congress won't support it. There are other theories. The other theory is Trump in Hanoi stayed up all night watching congressional hearings about him and was so sleepy and angry that he just walked away. That's possible. But I think the lesson I draw is he will. Same thing with Putin in Ukraine. He put a lot of Ukraine's equities and Europe's equities on the table. He was willing to trade away our allies to get a deal with Putin, but he didn't do it because Putin couldn't give him the deal. So I think Trump probably loves the drama of meeting with Kim Jong-un. He's, I suspect, very attracted to the idea of formally ending the Korean War. It's an armistice, technically still a state of war. And being the president who signed a peace treaty with North Korea, he loves all that pageantry and Nobel Peace Prize winning drama, which will make Japan and Korea nervous. Excuse me. But at some level, I think we can see that his art of the deal, at the end of the day, means not taking a deal that makes him look too weak. And North Korea, as you pointed out, is much less forthcoming than they were 6-7 years ago when he was meeting with Kim Jong-un. Much less. They are hardened their position. They've told the South they're no longer interested in unification. Even when they were, it was unification under Pyongyang. They don't even want that now. And U.S., China, and U.S. relations with Russia are so confrontational that North Korea can count on Moscow and Beijing to back them up, at least diplomatically. So the conditions for a deal are much, much worse. And Trump signaled he wanted to meet Kim Jong-un. It didn't happen. So I don't think the North Koreans also, I don't think they expect much from Trump either. So I worry less about Trump selling out everyone with Kim Jong-un. And we need to get the focus on what you said, which is that North Korea's nuclear missile submarine programs are really threatening. And what do we do? And are defense budgets in Japan, Korea, and Australia adequate? Are we cooperating enough on containing the problem and deterring it. It deserves more attention. But there's so much going on in the world. North Korea is just quietly doing its thing and getting away with it.
That's right. Well, Dr. Green, I know you're very busy. I have two more questions before letting you go. Let's talk about the relationship between Trump and Modi. And we know that the Prime Minister of India, Modi, again, I mean, let's be honest, I'm not a fan of social media, but it's really hard to not to read the messages that posted by President Trump on social media and also by the messages that posted by Narendra Modi. Again, but if we look at the messages and look at the tones, of course, certainly when we look at the content, we have to understand that the meaning's gonna be deeper than that. So from your perspective, Dr. Green, at this moment, how do you think that Narendra Modi is assessing the relationship with President Trump at this moment? Because given the fact that we look at the fact is India is a crucial country. When we talk about trade, we talk about this export and import relationship with the U.S. And also India is part of the BRICS, again, building partnership with Brazil, China, Russia, etc. But India is still very careful about dealing with Trump, especially when it comes to buying oil from Russia, and especially when it comes to the war in Ukraine. So how do you think, not from the Trump perspective, but from Modi's perspective, what is the way we can assess it? And how do you think that Modi is carefully dealing with Trump, not only as a politician, but also as a businessman? Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, it's a very important question because the U.S.-India relationship, which I worked on 20 years ago, very much at the center of that in the Bush White House, it's strategically the most consequential alignment of the current era. Although you could argue that China-Russia axis now may be strategically more significant, but that makes the India-U.S. one just as vital as well. I mentioned earlier the British Foreign Secretary who said, despite all the whining and complaints about the U.S., they're the only Americans we have. India, with its non-aligned tradition, the Indian political system does not think in those terms. The rhetoric doesn't go in that direction. But I think what Modi is realizing and the Indians are realizing are they're the only Americans we have. And for India to build capacity and to have a counterweight to China, its main strategic rival, Japan helps, Europeans can help, Australia can help a bit. There's no replacement for the U.S. So I think the Indian system realized it had to get this back on track. I suspect Modi was very surprised that it got off track because, he went to the U.S. In the first term and he campaigned in Texas with Trump, and they appeared together on stage in what was a very political rally for the BJP in India and Trump in this, I think, 60,000 Indian Americans in Texas in a big stadium for a Howdy Modi rally. So the Indian American diaspora is very politically important for both Trump and Modi. And the alignment, even though India's traditionally non-aligned, is more and more important in a geopolitical context and to build capacity, technological advancement in India. So it was too big to fail. What surprised Modi was after the India-Pakistan clash, the Pakistanis very skillfully credited Trump with achieving the ceasefire and nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. And Trump wanted Modi to also co-nominate him. And Modi couldn't do it because it's a politically too sensitive in Pakistan. And so this oil stuff is an issue, but that's not the main reason. It was frankly a bit of narcissism. But the two sides are working it, and I think there will be a Quad summit. It was put off. It's supposed to be hosted by India, the U.S., Japan, and Australia. A very important configuration in geopolitics in Asia. I think it will happen next year, probably in the first quarter now. Things are on track. And, Trump is all about allies and partners taking the U.S. more seriously and doing more to help us. I wish he did that more with Putin and Kim Jong-un, but he does it with the Europeans, he does it with the Asian allies. And it's not the way you should be running allies because we need to work together. But in some ways, you could argue the Biden administration was too nice to allies. It knew allies and partners were important, so it courted them. It didn't really press them very hard. Trump's pressing them too hard. The sweet spot's somewhere in the middle, but India's going to divest from these oil purchases from Russia. That's what Biden wanted too. He just didn't push hard. So it's very grating. It's probably more counterproductive than it is productive. But defense spending among our allies, India weaning itself from Russia. These are all things that the allies know they need to do. And I give a little bit of credit to Trump for pushing to make it happen. It's just too heavy-handed, too unpredictable. As I said, the sweet spot may be a little closer to what Biden did, but I think Biden and the Biden administration did not probably put enough pressure on allies.
Well, Dr. Green, I want to end our conversation by asking you the last question. Again, looking ahead, 2026. Well, there's no surprise that President Trump will eventually pay a state visit to China. And of course, this could be signified or interpreted in many ways. And we know that it's crucial to see that both China and U.S., of course, there will be or continue see the political and also this economic differences. But meanwhile, for the bigger picture that matters to the international community, for the two largest economies to get along and to able to cooperate, able to collaborate. So briefly, I want to hear what can we at least expect if President Trump were to pay a visit to China next year? How do you think that will send a strong message or even more than one message to the world? Your final thoughts.
Well, in 1972, when Nixon went to China, the Chinese interpreters were tall, beautiful women with perfect English who were trained to laugh at Nixon's jokes so that Zhou Enlai or Mao knew and could also laugh. And so the Chinese leadership in Zhangdanhai and in the meetings at the Great Hall of the People and so forth really, really flattered Nixon. And that approach will work very well with Trump. He loves military parades. He loves the flattery. And you can definitely count on that. But one important difference is in 1972, Soviet and Chinese troops were firing at each other across the Amur River. Right now, the PLA is firing or doing live fire exercises near Australia, the Philippines, Japan, Korea, and even near Guam. So the structural reality, especially with the PLA, is not flattering and not reassuring and not diminishing. So I think Trump will fall for, as he did the red carpet with Putin in Alaska, he'll love that. The optics will be a bit disconcerting for Japan especially, but also Korea, Australia, or India. But at the end of the day, the PLA is going to keep doing what the PLA does. And any quote unquote breakthrough or bromance will not last. There are some questions about how Trump handles Taiwan, how he handles technology controls on China that could be significant, that I'll be watching. I think there will be a Quad summit. I think it's very important for Japan, Australia, and India to do that so that there's bookends, so that's not just Trump and China, but the four major maritime allies and partners are also meeting with Trump. The question is, do you do it beforehand or do you do what the Europeans did after Trump's Alaska summit and do it after? So you can kind of do a course correction. But if we have them both, I think it'll be okay. If we just have the Trump summit to China, the optics alone could be a bit of a setback for the advances that we made or the crises we avoided in Trump's generally successful visit to Asia.
Well, again, Dr. Green, I agree with you 100%. Right now, at this moment, we don't know what will happen in 2026. We look at this geopolitical change, the ongoing relationships between U.S. and China, and also Asia's interest into Trump's administration. But one thing we do know that the whole world needs continuing to see collaboration, positive coalition in order to creating a better future. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor to speak to Dr. Michael Green. Again, Dr. Green is a professor and the chief executive officer at the United States Studies Center, and he served on the staff of the National Security Council at the White House from 2001 through 2005. Well, Dr. Green, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. We'd love to have you back on the show as we continue to pay attention or even closer attention to the global affairs. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Phil. Enjoyed it.